I'm Nate.
And I'm Rob.
And this is Rob and Nate Record a Podcast.
Yes, and we're going to kind of move into another theme month here. In the month of November, between what we had planned, we just had a couple weeks where we just decided we were going to pick something that we wanted to have the other person see. I guess you could almost say we wanted to make the other person watch. And so, because there's a bunch of, like, when Nate and I sit around and talk, sometimes we'll be like, wait, you've never seen this movie?
Yeah.
I can't believe you've never seen this movie. So I went first this month. I have been bugging Nate for some time to watch the movie Reign Over Me. This is the 2007 movie starring Adam Sandler, Don Cheadle, Jada Pinkett Smith, Liv Tyler, Saffron Burrows, Donald Sutherland, Robert Klein, Melinda Dillon. I mean, it's got a good cast.
I was going to say just for a moment that it's kind of a random movie to bug me to see, because nobody talks about this movie anymore. So the fact that this was kind of semi-high on your list.
Nobody talks about this movie anymore. I actually have heard this movie discussed 3 different times in podcasts in the last 2 weeks.
Really?
Yes.
This movie has...
just referenced briefly, not talked about in depth.
It has a following that I just have not picked up on.
Yes, and this is, for me, the reason why I like this movie and wanted to force Nate to see it is I think this is probably my favorite Adam Sandler role. It's a movie that is not the Adam Sandler comedies, which get a bad rap.
Because we had talked briefly, and it's similar with Nicolas Cage, that there's 2 schools. There's the good Adam Sandler, or the good Nicolas Cage movies, the bad Nicolas Cage movies, and then you've got the Adam Sandler comedies and the Adam Sandler dramas.
Yeah, or dramedies, but most of them are dramas. Adam Sandler has made a few attempts at serious movies with different results, and we'll get into that later. But I like this film. I think it works quite well. So getting into kind of the introduction of the film and plot overview, this movie's set in New York. Don Cheadle plays a man named Alan Johnson, who is a dentist who puts together his own practice. He becomes stuck, he begins to feel stuck between his work and his family life, kind of just too tied down, and
he's got a number of other dentists that
work in his practice.
Work with him. That they don't get along super well.
Well, he feels as though he's becoming isolated within this own practice that he created. But one day he encounters his old college roommate, who is Charlie Feynman, who is the Adam Sandler role. And Charlie Feynman lost his entire family in the terrorist attacks on 9/11.
By implication, which we may go back to.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a little bit. But Alan tries to renew the friendship, tries to track down Charlie. Charlie eventually allows him to succeed in these efforts because he's somebody he knew before he was married and had a family.
College roommates. Yeah.
Yeah. So in Charlie's mind, this is somebody who never knew his family. This is somebody who he can have a friendship with. And to him, it seems low risk that he's ever going to end up, he basically pretends like that part of his life never happened when they get back together. But soon enough, as they're doing, there's some great shots as they're going around the city and doing fun things. A Mel Brooks marathon. I mean, he just bugs
scooter thing. I kind of like.
Yeah, he just bugs Alan Johnson to do things with him and hang out longer than he wants to. It's providing exactly what Alan Johnson feels like he's lacking: some spontaneity and different things without his family. But soon, Feynman, the Don Cheadle character, decides that he's going to try and help Charlie Feynman with his troubles. And get him some help. And that leads to different parts of the movie. Even though this is a fairly serious movie, there's some really kind of funny comedic relief moments, and we'll get into those later. There's some kind of counterculture protest type things. Probably the first half of this film could be described as a dramedy, because there's some really funny stuff in the beginning of it. Later on in the film, it becomes quite serious. But yeah, that's probably enough of a plot overview. And now let's get into who's in the film, a little bit about it. I think I already mentioned it's directed by Mike Binder, also written by Mike Binder.
And he has a small part.
Yes, he does. He's in it. First, let's move to Nate's initial thoughts on this.
Okay. Well, I don't know why you have the extent... I don't know if fixation is the right word, but this is a movie you brought up to me for years. And eventually the dam burst. I have the opportunity to make Nate watch this movie. He's not going to watch it on his own. We're going to watch it together.
Well, I think it was because you like movies, some of Adam Sandler's other serious roles. You kind of
Yeah.
like
I
Spanglish. You
really
kind of
liked
like
Punch Drunk Love. Spanglish, I thought, it's been a long time since I've seen Spanglish, but I remember liking him in it, though I don't think it's a great movie.
But I
Uh,
thought this was superior to both of those.
and Funny People, I like him in that, where he's basically playing himself.
Yeah.
But going into this movie and knowing a little bit about it, so I knew this was. And the funny thing about the film is the film never actually says the line, Adam Sandler lost his family in 9/11.
Well, and I think Mike Binder was trying to set this up so that some years from now, when it came out, it was obvious this was a 9/11 movie.
Yeah.
But I think Mike Binder was trying to set this up so that so many years from now, or a number of years from now, when people see this, it's not necessarily going to be tied to 9/11, so it would retain a little bit of relevance.
Yeah. Well, they do kind of say it without saying it because they talk about the flights that she's on. They talk about the
Yeah, later
Pentagon.
on,
they just don't use the word 9/11 in the
yeah,
film.
so I
which
mean,
is-
eventually later on, Adam Sandler gives, but even this is vague enough that it doesn't make it definitively 9/11. I mean, it does, but it doesn't. So Adam Sandler later on says that, talks about them departing out of Boston, and this and that, the other, which anyone who's familiar with the events of 9/11 knows he's describing the events of 9/11. But if you aren't familiar enough with the events of 9/11, it's a plausible
I
story,
imagine,
but it doesn't tie itself directly.
if somebody watches this, some kid born after 9/11 watches this film now or in 10, 20 years,
Wouldn't put it
they
together.
may not. That might not click depending on how kind of aware they are of their own history.
Well, and I think that was intentional. But yeah. But anyways, getting back to why I wanted to force Nate to do it, of those other serious Adam Sandler movies that you mentioned, I always thought this was the best of those. So that was why I wanted to force Nate to watch it. So
I do not think this is the best of those. I think that is pretty clear. We've been discussing this as we prepare for this broadcast, and there's just something about the fact that Adam Sandler is playing a 9/11 widower that I just refuse to accept on some level. And he's doing it with a little Adam Sandler voice, the way he talks like this sometimes. It's just like, no, it's wrong. I just can't accept it. This is a film where we're skipping ahead a little bit. I'd probably give it a reluctant recommendation. But I think that the whole, while it kind of works, if you pick it apart and you look at the parts, it's more than the substance of its parts. They're just
So part of the
things I don't-
conversation we had before we started recording is I said to Nate, you really want to hate this movie, but you kind of like it.
But I kind of like it with an emphasis on the kinda.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know. It's just it seems like this is definitely, so this film came out in early 2007. It's filmed in 2006. The script probably was written 2005-ish. So this is a film where the 9/11 is still rawer than it is today, and I don't think as processed yet. There's still a quality of them not fully. It's just not fully processed, which works, I guess, for his character, because his character wouldn't be able to process what had happened to his family.
Yeah.
But I don't know. It seemed a little gimmicky to me. It seemed a little forced. Like, if this had not been about 9/11, if his family had just died in some plane crash or something like that, I think I would have been more open to it.
So then at some point I almost would say rewatch this and erase 9/11 from your mind when you watch it and see if you still like it. You can, but you can't, but you can. But if you, because I mean, you're saying, and I'm referencing, this isn't necessarily definitively 9/11. We know it's definitively 9/11, but it also was intentionally made so that it's not definitively 9/11. And you're saying if you were born after 9/11 and didn't know all the details in the way that you and I do, you could make the assumption that this isn't 9/11. So at some point, not necessarily anytime soon, but at some point, I almost want you to rewatch it and not think of it as a 9/11 film.
So you think of this, one of the things I can't get past with Adam Sandler is the voice. He's doing a voice not unlike the voice in The Waterboy, which is a movie I despise.
Yeah.
That taints it somewhat. You think of this as his best dramatic performance.
Yes.
I will grant you there is a scene in
But
the
I will
doctor's
admit
office.
that that's largely on the back of Don Cheadle.
Yeah, but Don Cheadle's good in this. There is a scene, a big theme of this film is Adam Sandler's refusing to acknowledge what happened. And
Yes.
Don Cheadle is pushing him because he knows, like, you got to deal with this. Your life is a mess. He's living off of insurance and some kind of settlement from the crash.
Yeah.
He's given up his dental practice, and he spent most of his days collecting vinyl records and playing
remodeling
video
the
games.
kitchen.
And remodeling the kitchen repeatedly, because one of the last conversations he had with his wife was about remodeling the kitchen.
Yeah.
So it kind of keeps them alive for him to remodel his kitchen multiple times a year.
Yes.
But there's a moment where eventually Don Cheadle persuades him to go and visit this psychiatrist he knows. They never really explain how they know each other.
Well,
Him and
she's in
Liv
the
Tyler?
same building as Don
same-
Cheadle's
okay.
practice.
Okay, that makes sense.
And so, I mean, it's a recurring thing.
Is
Within
Liv
the
Ty-
movie, he waits for her outside the building on the street and talks to her as she's walking.
Is Liv Tyler doing a voice in this, or is that her regular voice?
I think it's her regular voice.
It just seems a little higher than I associate with her.
I think in other movies, she's playing down her voice.
Oh, okay.
In media
Okay.
interviews I've seen of her, this is pretty much her natural
Okay.
voice.
So she's a young lady psychologist. The Adam Sandler character keeps emphasizing her youth. It's like, I don't want to tie you so young.
I
don't
can't
wanna
talk to you, you're too young.
You're too
Yeah.
young. But there's a moment where he eventually breaks down and he talks at some length about the loss of his family in the office. Don Cheadle's there waiting
In
for
the
him,
lobby of
in
the
lobby
office.
reading a Captain America and the Falcon comic book,
Which Adam Sandler's
been
character
trying to
given-
get
yeah.
him to read. And he just starts talking, and that's a good, solid moment.
Well, so in the previous scene, Liv Tyler's character is, saying, "Hey, eventually you're going to have to talk to this. Like, I'm willing to be patient, but eventually we're going to have to address
And
this."
she even says, it doesn't have to be me.
Yes.
You just need to talk about it.
And so he and this happens in his sessions with the Liv Tyler psychologist. He says, "Can this be over?" And she says,
Yeah.
"If you want it to be."
And that's
so,
how they all end. They have a couple minutes, and then he's like, okay. I'm done.
So he walks out of her office into the lobby where Don Cheadle's waiting and says, "Let's go." And Don Cheadle's making a comment about the comic book, and Adam Sandler launches into the story of the family.
Yeah.
And yeah.
That's a good scene.
Oh, yeah. That's a strong scene.
That's the good dramatic scene in this film. I don't know if anything else fully worked for me.
The
from
courthouse was okay. I liked
him.
the
The
courthouse.
courthouse was okay.
Yeah. The courthouse worked for me. Adam Sandler perhaps overplayed it. His then, devolving into the screaming of the song, but every other part of that courthouse scene worked for me, and him putting on the headphones, listening to the song, which is the title song where the movie gets its name, Reign Over Me. And Donald Sutherland as the judge is good.
Yeah, Donald Sutherland. So this cast in this film is quite impressive. And I had forgotten, I remember seeing Donald Sutherland in the opening credits. Oh, Donald Sutherland. And then I forget that he's going to be in this film because he doesn't show up until like the last 20 minutes playing the judge at a competency hearing, because there's some things that Adam Sandler does, threatens some people with, he's trying to commit suicide by cop at a certain point because he's under such pain that he waves
gets
a
put in
gun
the
at a
mental
cab.
hospital.
They don't obviously shoot him. He gets to the mental hospital, and they want to commit him for a long time. And so they have a hearing to discuss this, and Donald Sutherland is the judge. Adam Sandler's character has his his in-laws,
Yes.
who
Robert Klein and Melinda Dillon.
Melinda Dillon have
The
been
Templetons.
trying to communicate with him, keep a relationship with him.
Or Templemans, sorry.
The Templemans. So they have you see them fairly early in the film. They have a scene with Melinda Dillon talking to Don Cheadle.
Mm-hmm.
But Robert Klein doesn't say like a word in this film until like the last 20 minutes. To the point where I'm like, why the heck bother casting Robert Klein in this if you're not going to do anything with him at all?
Yeah, I kind of have a feeling that there was...
I mean, they do, but they just wait so long in the movie to do anything.
Well, it seems to me as though there was probably a number of scenes that were filmed in this and then edited it out into what the final product was.
Yeah.
And probably a lot of those ended up being the Robert Klein speaking roles.
And this was a film that I kind of regret that I didn't borrow the DVD from you and listen to the audio commentary, because as we discussed...
Oh, you still can.
And I still can. This is a film that I came in thinking I was absolutely going to hate.
Yes.
And I ended it puzzled by it and not entirely sure what to think about it. Now, we've discussed that when I watch a movie, I tend to be very structure-oriented. I want to know, what is this beast that I want? What kind of movie is this? And when I can't pin it down, there's an element of frustration involved in that. And oftentimes, I will have to see a movie a second time. Now, sorry, I know what this kind of movie this is. Now that I know what this is, now I can watch it for the performances and watch it again within that framework and process it that way. I don't know if I'm particularly anxious to do that again with this film, at least at this point.
Well, but I think ultimately your final judgment of it might benefit from that.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I'm saying do it right away, but ultimately I think eventually when you get around to doing that, I think your ultimate opinion of this movie will benefit from that analysis.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's just kind of an awkward. It's uneven.
Well, and like I mentioned, probably the first half to 2/3 of the movie is a dramedy. There are some really funny moments, and we'll talk about those in a minute. But the first half to 2/3 are kind of a dramedy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of comedic relief, and I almost feel as though the ending of the movie could have benefited from some of the comic relief structure that they established earlier in the movie. In particular, the Charlie Feynman, Adam Sandler's character. Mm-hmm. As they first start going around New York in their friendship, he does this thing where he does trivia.
Uh-huh.
And part of me...
That kind of drops off.
Yeah, and part of me is like, that courthouse scene where he's sitting outside with Liv Tyler with his psychiatrist.
Yeah, I see with the trivia.
Or, and when he goes back into the courthouse to talk to the Templemans, there's elements there. He could have brought up his trivia thing, and the movie probably would have benefited from it.
Yeah, that would have been, you're right, because it would be something you look back on as a dropped thread.
Yeah, yeah. Or even when he's moving into his new apartment, he could have done that. Of course, once he's moved into his new apartment, you do see the doorman reading the same comic that Don Cheadle's character had been reading. So, obviously he's making friends with the doorman.
And I'm impressed that he got that comic, because that is an old Captain America and the Falcon comic book from the 1970s that I literally spent years looking for one. I found a bound volume of some about a year ago. Read one or two. But... So in this version of Captain America, tangent, Captain America is frozen, and he comes out in the 70s, and he teams up with the Falcon, who's black, to principally fight crime in the inner city. The fact that that exists is awesome.
Yes. See, Nate, I'm telling you, you should be liking this movie. There are so many elements in this movie that if it was not Adam Sandler, if it was not Adam Sandler's 9/11 movie, you would love this movie.
No, I don't know if I'd love it.
Well, love is probably a strong way to put that, but you would like this movie if it had not been Adam Sandler.
It's dramedy, it's Adam Sandler, and then it just tries to be so earnest, especially towards the end.
Well, now let's shift topics here.
We need to talk about the elephant in the room in this movie, right? Or is that what we're going
to do? No, I wasn't quite getting there yet. And there's two that I still want to get to there. Yeah. But first, and we started having this conversation before we started recording. To you, why is Adam Sandler unredeemable?
Adam Sandler's not unredeemable, and as I had mentioned before,
see, but your whole
like
critique
his
of this
dramatic
is this,
work.
But your whole critique of this is it's Adam Sandler
because he's doing a freaking Adam Sandler voice. He's doing the Adam Sandler kind of high-pitched, whiny voice, and he's doing
a character. He had to develop this character.
So his go-to is do the water boy.
I mean, we could go back and forth on that. It's not worth going back and forth on, but he's doing a character, and Adam Sandler always does a character. And some of that almost makes sense, though, because...
He doesn't do the voice in the other drama films that I've mentioned. He just plays it straight.
He does not do his natural voice, though.
Uh-huh.
He is doing a voice in those films.
Okay.
Listen to him talk. Those films, that is not his natural voice. So he is doing a voice in those films. But the voice that he does in this film, I think, kind of fits because the character he's portraying has clearly reverted after his family's died. And he's reverted. And so,
Okay, yeah.
This film could have modified if it were to continue to go past the conclusion that ends the film. But, perhaps his voice then would have changed again. But... To me, it worked. It's he's reverted, and the voice works. Yeah.
Yeah. I just can't get past it. I can't necessarily offer you a definitive explanation or excuse.
Well,
I just can't get past the fact that he's Adam Sandler in this.
Well, finish the thread of the thought that you started earlier. When I asked this to you before, why is Adam Sandler unredeemable? You said it's Brett Kavanaugh.
It's Brett Kavanaugh. So. We haven't talked a lot yet about politics on this podcast. We'll keep it to a minimum. But so last year, the Brett Kavanaugh hearings. I think that the charges against him were credible, and we could talk about that in more detail. But there are certain things, context clues, that to me indicate that I'm blanking the name of his principal accuser. That
I forget
that her story holds up to me.
Yeah.
Now. is it enough to keep him off the Supreme Court? Is it enough to get rid of his judgeship? So I would say not enough to get rid of his judgeship. Like, I'd be content to keep him on the court where he was, because it's just not definitive.
A judge who became censured on a circuit level.
Yeah. You don't know 100% if this is true. But there's enough reason to think that this might be true, that maybe it's not a good idea to put him on the Supreme Court. Because then you have this guy on there that half the country thinks that he physically attacked a woman.
Yes.
And that's not good, because the Supreme Court is one of the few things we have left that is theoretically above politics. Not really, but it's more so than the other branches.
Yeah.
And so you had talked about this upcoming Adam Sandler film where I guess he's getting some Oscar buzz. And I'm like, no, he should never win an Oscar. Now, I'm fine with some of his dramatic work, but he's Adam Sandler, and Adam Sandler should never get an Oscar, just like Brett Kavanaugh should not be on the Supreme Court.
See, and I don't think Adam Sandler is irredeemable in that context. He has morphed, he has changed since his original comedies, which, so his original comedies, Billy Madison, Happy Gilmore, those types of... those.
No, it's funny, I've not seen those.
Yeah, and we're going to eventually see those at some point, but...
The Waterboy, I have a very distinct memory of, with some friends of mine, senior year of high school, they wanted to go see a movie. We'd had sleepover on a trampoline at somebody's house. And I think it was the first Adam Sandler movie I saw.
Yeah.
I hated it.
I mean, there are a couple Adam Sandler movies that are just atrocious. Waterboy, I'm trying to remember the name of the other one. He does like a Mr. Smith Goes to Washington parody.
Oh, the Mr. Deeds.
Yeah, those
That's
are
okay.
They're bad films. I would say probably his strongest comedies are Happy Gilmore, Billy Madison, Big Daddy, which I know you don't like either.
I'm not seeing that either.
I thought you had.
No.
There's some of his comedies are good.
That's part of the Little Nicky.
That's not good. So there's Adam Sandler comedies that are good and that work, and then I believe there's also Adam Sandler serious roles that are good and that work. And I don't see him as irredeemable. If he were to get, perhaps he should never win an Oscar, but to say he should never get nominated, I don't know. But that's a whole other conversation.
Because, you got like Robin Williams comes to mind. So you look at Robin Williams in Mork and Mindy, and then you look at Robin Williams in Good Will Hunting. There's obviously some growth there. And I was reading something the other day, I think it was in that Burt Reynolds memoir that I've been reading, because he's been teaching acting as a lot of what he's done with his later years. And he talks about how he thinks it's easier to make a good comic actor into a good dramatic actor than to make a good dramatic actor into a good comic actor. I think that's true, because you've seen more crossovers. And I was thinking, like, who's a dramatic actor who's given a really good comic performance? And the one that comes to mind is Ray Fiennes in The Grand Budapest Hotel, which I don't think you've seen.
I've seen part of it, but not the whole thing.
He should have been Oscar nominated for that, because he's hilarious, and he's Ray Fiennes. He's not a comic actor.
Yeah.
But anyway, circling back, Adam Sandler just... I'm open to him dramatic within certain contours.
Yeah.
But again, him as the 9/11 widower, I just can't fully embrace that. So now are we going to talk about the elephant?
Well, we'll get there. There's two things I want to talk about in these lines. This is almost two different movies. Like I said, the first half to 2/3 are more of a dramedy, and there are some hilarious moments in there.
So what would you call the last third? Straight drama?
Yes.
All right.
Yes. But the first half, it's what it does to establish itself versus how it ends are very distinctly different.
The tone's very different.
Yeah. Some of the characters tie across, in particular Saffron Burrow, who plays Donna Remar.
Yeah, that's the elephant.
Well, and then there's also Melanie the receptionist, and I want to talk about both of those roles independently. Which one do you want to talk about first?
I want to take another brief digression and just talk a little bit about Jada Pinkett Smith as
Don Cheadle's wife.
When I first saw her, for half a moment, I thought it was Zoe Saldana.
But
Zoe Saldana would have been too young to play Don Cheadle's wife at this point. That's another plot line where they do this little thing at the end where he has this, because she thinks that he's too distant.
Yeah.
And he thinks that she's smothering him.
Yes.
And they have a conversation at the end to just kind of tie up that plot line. But she disappears for the vast majority of this movie.
Yep.
And they introduce this as an plot thread, but it feels like an afterthought at the very end. Oh yeah, we need to wrap up that they recognize.
Yeah, I think it adds to the film ultimately, though.
You wouldn't want to not wrap it up if you've introduced it, but it feels like it didn't get the amount of screen time that it needed to be fully developed.
Well, along with Robert Klein, that part of that could have been left in editing.
Which I'd be interested to see the deleted scenes in this movie, which I won't always say.
Yes. See, this is, again, coming back to ultimately you should have a positive view of this movie. Mm-hmm. But, again, that's just me lobbying you to like a movie that I like. So do you want to talk first about Saffron Burrow?
No, let's talk about the receptionist, yeah.
So Paula Newsome plays Melanie, the receptionist at the dental practice, and she is hilarious.
She is both the perfect receptionist and the worst receptionist.
Yeah. You would probably not want to fire her, but you would constantly not be happy with her if she was the receptionist at your company. She does some hilarious things. Well, first let's address one thing. There are certain shots where you see Paula Newsome at her workstation, and right underneath the counter is a sticker under the window. Do you recall what this has on it?
I did not notice the sticker, but you mentioned it, and
you didn't notice the sticker?
I did not notice it, but you mentioned it, and I recall these stickers existing.
Okay, so the sticker has a date on it. I believe, actually, let me see if I can verify it real quick. Yeah, I'll be able to verify it.
No, I already know what it is. It's 1/20/09.
06 or 09?
Yeah.
Which is the date that George W. Bush leaves office. So there's things that are just tied into this movie so perfectly.
Yeah, I like
this. Clearly has a George Bush protest element in her character, and
it makes sense. It totally makes sense for that character.
Yeah,
and I like little things, little side things that don't necessarily, they're not vital at all. But if you notice them, you pick up. Oh, I've learned a little bit more about this character that I wouldn't have otherwise. It's not essential for her in the role, but it fleshes her out just a little bit more.
Yeah.
And she's just great because she's a no-nonsense receptionist.
Yeah, and she doesn't put up with anything. If someone tells her, take care of this with this client, as we see at one point, she takes care of it.
She takes care of it. It's like, privately, don't talk
He's
about
like, you could have called her.
Yeah.
Don Cheadle, after this happens, and we'll talk about this scene in a minute, but Don Cheadle's character says, you could have called her. And Melanie's just kind of like gives no crap, and whatever. Which brings us to the elephant in the room character, Saffron Burrow playing Donna Remar.
Saffron Burrows is she's English. I think she's lived in France for a while. I recognized her face, and I had to look her up afterwards. She was for about a season on a show I quite like called Boston Legal.
Oh, yeah.
She played a lawyer who had previously been a madam.
Which is her tie to Binder, the director and the writer.
Because Binder
was a writer on Boston Legal.
He was a writer and director.
Or writer and director on Boston Legal.
All right.
Yeah. Anyway, so the elephant in the room that we've addressed here,
and we're gonna stop once again for a brief digression about the debate about the term to use to describe this character. Was the shorthand term in talking about the film immediately afterwards that we used?
Well, and we'll get there in a minute because we're going to introduce how this comes up. So Donna Remar's character comes into Don Cheadle's practice and makes an appointment for a single veneer. So she meets Don Cheadle's character and is like, I know you don't do this normally. I just want a single veneer. Basically, what we come to discover is that she has a crush on Don Cheadle's character. How she was introduced to Don Cheadle's never made clear.
There's somebody else that she goes to see in the same building.
She goes to see Liv Tyler, who's the psychiatrist.
Yeah, you're right.
But at one point she says, I've had these thoughts and feelings about you, and my psychiatrist told me to act on them.
She'd recently gone through a divorce
or something.
Her husband had cheated on her.
Yeah. And so at one point she offers to perform fellatio on Don Cheadle's character. And Don Cheadle chases her out of the practice, and that's when he then tells Melanie, tell her never to come back.
He's got kind of a great reaction to it because it's this.
I'm interested, but I can't do this.
This is actually happening.
Yeah.
And so there's a moment of, I'm just taking in the fact that this is actually happening. And then he just kind of stops like, you need to go.
Well, and some of it's blatant. Like when she first meets with him to ask for the single veneer, he says, well, which tooth were you concerned about? And she goes, you tell me, pick one. So it's very obvious, this could have been prevented.
And they make a comment that this had happened before, that there'd been patients that had developed crushes on him, which I'm I'm sure happens
Yeah.
in any medical community, in any community.
Yeah.
I don't know if Don Cheadle would strike out to me as someone that would happen to a lot. I mean,
I don't
he's
know.
a good enough looking guy.
Yeah, but so Don Cheadle tells Melanie, tell her never to come back. And so this is what I was alluding to earlier. Melanie opens the window.
When
Donna
the
Remar
receptionist
is down the hall,
Yeah.
down the hall going towards the elevator. And she yells, Miss Remar, Miss Remar. And, Donna Remar's character's coming back. And Don Cheadle's like, no, no, no. And she's like, don't ever come back. Don't call here. Don't, and just lays into her.
You're going to need to find another dentist. And it shouldn't be in this building. And yeah.
Just to a way overkill extent, and at the same time.
Makes it awkward.
So she closes the window and Don Cheadle's like, you could have called her. And Melanie, Paula Newsome as Melanie just kind of shrugs her shoulders like, well, you told me to get rid of her. I got rid of her, But yeah, I mean, there's other good scenes that happen within the practice, and Melanie's reaction to it is great. Like, there's the scene where Don Cheadle and Adam Sandler have been out all night, and Don Cheadle goes back to the practice. He walks into the room where his partners are, and he just lays into his partners, and then he just walks out into the reception area, and Melanie's reaction is just like, oh my gosh, and Adam Sandler and Don Cheadle are. I guess what led up to it was Adam Sandler telling Don Cheadle, yeah, I remember you from college. Like, you took no crap from anybody, blah, blah, blah. He goes into his partner's office, lays into all of his partners, walks out, and they're sitting in the lobby, and Adam Sandler goes, that was this other guy from college that took no crap from nobody.
Yeah, now that I think about it, it was so-and-so. He was the one that never took any crap. You were taking crap all the time.
So, I mean, these are comedic moments in this film that, to me, just were great.
They got a good chemistry. I would not be opposed to seeing them do something together again.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, these are elements of this film that, like I said, for me, just work. There's a few little notes. One of the things, every song in this movie that you hear in the movie is referenced in the movie. They either speak of the song or you see the song title on Adam Sandler's iPod. But it has a good score.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
I mean, great elements of this film. Good score, good comedy acting or comedic relief, good dramatic moments.
But again, the elephant. Go back to Saffron Burrows.
Yes.
Donna Remer. Why is she a character in this movie?
Well, I mean, she could have had her interactions in the beginning of the film in the dentist office, and then never came up again. In fact, there are probably the biggest flaws in this movie are the subsequent roles or appearances of Donna Remer later in the film. The scene where she appears in the psychiatrist's office as Don Cheadle and Adam Sandler leading.
That's funny because that's the topper on her reference. My psychologist told me, and then she later tells him when she comes back to apologize because she threatens to sue. Yeah, and then they kind of talk her down.
And Don Cheadle's like, you need to get a new psychiatrist. Yeah, so Don Cheadle has told Adam Sandler about this interaction with Donna Remer, and then, as he's telling him he's getting sued by her, Adam Sandler, and this is where the controversy comes up, they refer to her repeatedly in the movie as Blowjob Girl. Mm-hmm. And it's hilarious when they walk out of the psychiatrist's office and see her in the lobby and they're walking away. Adam Sandler, Don Cheadle's like, that's her, and Adam Sandler's like, that's Blowjob Girl? And he's like, you should have let her do it, and there's some funny moments there. But the problem and the flaw in the movie is later on in the movie, at the end of the movie, Liv Tyler's character, who is supposed to be Adam Sandler's psychiatrist and has been making these impassioned arguments as to why he should be released into her care and not kept in a mental hospital, brings Liv Tyler's character to the courthouse.
Setting up two patients.
For some sort of relationship. This would never happen. Yeah. Like, the ethics boundaries, like, if this actually happened, then Adam Sandler's character should never have been released to Liv Tyler's care. Yeah. That's probably the biggest flaw in the movie.
So the reason she's there, of course, is for comic aspects and to set her up as a potential love interest. They leave it dangling a bit at the end.
And she goes further to set her up as a further love interest. If Liv Tyler's character, or not Liv Tyler, Saffron Burrows' character had just shown up at the courthouse of her own volition, fine. But at the end of the film, Liv Tyler brings her to his apartment.
His new apartment.
His new apartment where he's just moved and left no forwarding address.
His in-laws completely don't know where he is.
Who were the ones that were trying to get him committed and they just convinced not to commit him. Yeah. And then Liv Tyler brings her to his apartment, is there for maybe 30 seconds or a minute in the film time, which means in the film it would have been less than 10 minutes in real world time, and then leaves her there. No, this is never happening. Yeah, that is probably the biggest flaw in this movie.
It's just a weird decision. If there's anything I want to pick Mike Binder's brains about, it's like, what is the genesis of this storyline, and why did you decide it should be in your 9/11 widower movie?
Yeah. And why was she there at the end? Well, I guess kind of final thoughts on this. What would you, how would you rate this film?
I would probably give this film 2.5 stars.
On the 4-star scale?
On the 4-star scale, and probably around a 5 on the 10-star scale.
Really? So that's lower on the 10-star scale than I kind of suspected. I thought you would have ended up in that 6 or 7
Maybe
star.
5.5, 6.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, on the 4-star scale, I would give this 3 stars. This is a solid film. This is not a all-time great world beater film. On the 10-star scale, I would give this in that 7 to 8 range. I'd say it's worth seeing. What are your thoughts on that? Because you want to not like this film. So what are your thoughts on that?
It's not worth seeing. You can see it. I don't know if I would have ever seen it if you hadn't made me see it. It's not one I would obviously have gone out of my way for. I came in with certain preconceptions. They were somewhat interrupted. But as we keep getting back to, I just can't get over his... And that was another thing we talked about. Would this film have worked better for me if someone other than Adam Sandler had been cast in that part? And you found out that there were several other actors that had been considered for the part prior to Sandler's casting.
Well, and I guess one other thing I wanted to address, kind of as a slight tangent in terms of this conversation, then I'll get back to what you were talking about. The video game that Adam Sandler and Don Cheadle play in this film is called Shadow of Colossus. It's from 2005. It's a real video game. It's a game about a man who slays colossi in an attempt to bring a woman back to life. Fits very well within the context of the film.
And even some of the images, there's a screenshot with like a ethereal dragon, kind of a cloudy, misty dragon, and these 2 towers. And it definitely evokes an airplane and the Twin Towers.
Well, so early scripts of the film had Sandler's character playing a simple 1980s style game until editor Jeremy Rausch recalled that his own father watched the movie Aliens from 1986 obsessively as a, quote, thinly veiled kind of Vietnam veteran kind of story, close quote. So seeing the imagery of the colossi falling, he realized someone who was dealing with 9/11 would be engrossed by a giant that keeps collapsing over and over again. So he demonstrated it to the writer and director Mike Binder and the actors and actresses, and then ultimately with the approval of the game's director Fumito Ueda, it was included in the movie. I almost wish they'd made a bigger point of, made something more of that. And again, that feels like it was probably left out in editing.
Well, that's a little Easter egg for those who recognize the game.
Yeah, but then getting back to if someone else had played the Adam Sandler character. Adam Sandler actually initially declined the role because he was terrified of it. But he later came back to it. At one point, Javier Bardem was going to play Don Cheadle's character.
Okay, that would work.
Oh, Mike Binder wrote the lead role with Tom Cruise in mind.
That would be different.
I don't think that would have worked.
It would not have been a comedy. It wouldn't have even been. It wouldn't have been a dramedy. It would have been a straight drama if they put Tom Cruise in that.
Any other closing thoughts on this?
Was there another actor that was being considered?
So there was other actors that were considered. I'm not finding the
list.
Direct ties.
Because I had one that kept occurring to me throughout the film.
Of someone who could play this role?
Played it.
Who's that?
And we're thinking about someone who could have, in 2006, 2007, would have been the right age for this part. John Cusack.
Yes, you did mention this to me as a possible...
I don't know if it would have been any better at all. But it just seems like more of a John Cusack part than an Adam Sandler part.
I suspect if John Cusack had played that role, you would have accepted it right away. Mm-hmm. Not that you would have loved this movie or would be your favorite movie, but I think for you wouldn't have the hang-ups that you have now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably true. But I don't think I think it would have been more forgotten. Because one of the things that makes this stand out is the casting of Adam Sandler.
Yeah. I completely agree. Any other thoughts?
No. So we will go on momentarily to discuss the film which I chose to force Rob to watch for this month. Flash forward 2 days, and we have just finished watching my selection for Make Each Other Watch a Movie Month. My selection would be Serenity. The inspiration for choosing this film to make Rob watch is because he chose Reign Over Me to frustrate me, so I've chosen Serenity to frustrate him. So
Let's be clear, though. I didn't pick Rain Over Me to frustrate you.
it had the effect of frustrating me.
Yes, but that was not my intent. I, to be clear, I really want Nate to like Rain Over Me, and I think on some level Nate wants to like Rain Over Me, but on some level he wants to hate it.
Yeah.
So, anyways, continue.
Whereas with Serenity, I want you to share the experience that I had watching this movie and finally have someone to talk about this movie with, because I don't know anybody else who's seen it. And this is a movie that demands to be talked about. So the reason I saw Serenity in the first place, now I had seen previews for it. The previews present this as basically a neo-noir ex-wife hires ex-husband to kill current husband film. And seeing the previews, I'm like, well, if they've done right, this could be okay. I see what they're going for. I don't necessarily see that we need this movie. And I just hadn't seriously considered seeing it until I saw something on the internet. Now, there is a YouTube personality by the name of Brad Jones. He has a YouTube channel called Stoned Gremlins Productions. And he principally has a number of little shows he does. There's principally two. One is called The Cinema Snob, where he affects the persona of a snooty film critic and watches horrible movies and talks about them. And one is called Midnight Screening, where him and a small group of friends of his see basically every movie that comes to Springfield, Illinois. From big releases to, they saw the Oogie Wumps movie, which was like for preschoolers. They bought tickets for that. And so of course he saw this movie. And this is a guy who watches bad movies for a living. And very early in the review, he says, I watch bad movies for a living. Very seldom will I say this, but pay money to see this movie, this bad movie in the theater. It appears to be one thing, and then it's something else entirely. I listened to that review, I think, too long, because the twist was spoiled for me. And I'd be fascinated to see an alternate me reacting to not knowing what this twist was. But even knowing what the twist is, it is an experience. It is a bad movie that is totally worth watching. So
I think I spotted the twist fairly early.
Yeah.
And because I spotted it early, I just missed it.
It hints at it. Yeah. So you kind of saw it and like, no, that's too obvious.
Yes.
Is that more or less what happened?
Yes.
Well, I'm going to give you a little background of this movie. This movie was actually filmed in the summer of 2017, but it was held back for release until January of 2019. It's never a good sign. You wait more than a year to release the movie, and you dump it in January, the dumping ground month of theatrical releases. It's not the summer. It's too late for awards season. Let's clear out all the crap in the inventory, put it in theaters. This movie stars Matthew McConaughey as a man who goes by two names. His actual name is John Mason, but he is going by the pseudonym of Baker Dill. He lives and has for some time on Plymouth Island, which appears to be somewhere in the Caribbean. He has a boat called the Serenity, which is a very obvious evocation of the Christopher Cross song from the early 80s. Sailing away. Sailing away. Serenity is apparently the name of the boat in that song. At least the word Serenity is used in that song.
Okay.
And he spends most of his time obsessing over a giant tuna that he tries to catch, which he has named Justice. He has this boat. He takes tourists out for hire, but he will overrule the tourist if he thinks that he has a chance of catching this tuna of which he is obsessed. So into his kind of blah life comes his ex-wife, played by Anne Hathaway, Karen. They have a son. The son's name is Patrick. They've been separated, divorced for 10 plus years. Anne Hathaway, or Karen, much to John's he advised very much against this, married this man by the name of Frank Zacharias, played by Jason Clarke, who is involved in organized crime. He seemed like he'd be a path to a better life for them and money. John had gone off to Iraq, served in Iraq. He'd been messed up by his experience, and presumably that's what caused the marriage to break apart. Karen marries Frank. Frank turns out to be very abusive. Karen seeks John out. It took her a while to find him because he'd changed his name, with the offer of, please kill the man who's abusing me and your son, and I will give you $10 million of his crooked money. And so John, or Baker Dill, has to make a decision whether or not to kill this man, which in broad outline, in very broad sense, is what this movie is about, even though it's really about something else entirely. This film has quite the twist, and this discussion will spoil it. I did want to talk briefly about the director of the film. It was directed by a man named Stephen Knight. Mr. Knight has directed a couple of films, but he is principally known for his screenwriting. He has some very solid credits to his credit. He wrote a film called Dirty Pretty Things that came out in 2002. It had Audrey Tautou in it. It is a film that I've seen. It's been a long time, so I'm sketchy on a lot of the details, but it is about immigrant smuggling in France. It's quite good. He then wrote Amazing Grace, which is one of the better Christian films, if you want to call it that, which is about the man who was responsible for getting slavery outlawed, passing the legislation to outlaw slavery in the British Empire. Then he also wrote Eastern Promises, which is a film about the Russian mob with Viggo Mortensen. More recently, he wrote the screenplay to Allied, which was the Robert Zemeckis film about World War II spies, starring Brad Pitt and, I'm blanking her name, Marion Cotillard. This is the film on which they allegedly had an affair and was kind of the genesis for Brad Pitt's split with Angelina Jolie. So anyway, the writer-director here, Steve Knight, is a very capable, talented man. What was he thinking when he wrote this screenplay? I'm sure we'll go into many of the different nooks and corners to be explored, but I turn this now over to Rob to go over first what he knew or remembered of the film going in, and then his first impressions.
I didn't know much of anything about it other than it was Matthew McConaughey and Anne Hathaway. I remembered Nate telling me he'd seen this movie and telling me a little bit about it, but I didn't recall exactly what he told me. But I did remember Nate telling me about it and telling me that I should see it at some point. Mm-hmm. So I'd marked it on a to-watch list, but had just not gotten around to it. In fact, I've looked at that title and thought about watching this movie on like 3 or 4 different occasions, probably in the last 2 months. But yeah, just had never gotten around to it.
You're glad you didn't, though.
Kind of. I'm still not sure what to make of this, and so I'm kind of curious where this conversation will go.
Yeah, well,
because I have questions. Usually we talk before we record, and I would have, we'd answer each other's questions to some extent before we record. So I'm kind of curious to see where this conversation goes.
I did want to mention 2 things. As soon as we finished the movie, we just finished it, we started setting up to record this, and I told Rob, it's like, I'm going to hold back because my mouth wants to spew all sorts of stuff about this movie. Rob said 2 things. He said, this is a blank crazy movie, and then he said, I have a lot of questions, which really is the appropriate response to having just seen this movie.
Yeah. I do have a bunch of questions, and I don't know whether to go. So I kind of jotted down some notes as we were watching it, so I don't know whether to go like just through my notes as I watched the movie, or how we want to go about this.
Might as well start with the notes, and then if we end up going in different directions, we'll just go with it.
So kind of first thoughts, though, like one of the first things that struck me about this is you see Diane Lane fairly early in the film. Mm-hmm. And I was like, man, top billed is Matthew McConaughey and Anne Hathaway. And they got Diane Lane.
They've got a pretty good cast in this film. So in addition to the 3 already mentioned, and Jason Clarke, and I can never pronounce this man's name, Daimon Hansu.
Jamon Honsu.
Jimon
I don't know how to
Hansu.
pronounce it either.
He's a fairly prolific actor, and in
Yeah.
fact, if memory serves, I want to say that he was in the.
He was in Guardians of the Galaxy,
Well,
Amistad.
I want to say he was in the Stephen Knight film Dirty Pretty Things, but that may not be
He was also in
accurate.
Blood Diamond.
He's a working actor. He was in Amistad, the Steven Spielberg film about the slave ship from the late 90s. He was not in Dirty Pretty Things. He was in America, which is a rather good film. I'm blanking the director. It was Irish director.
He was in Captain Marvel, Shazam, The Legend of Tarzan.
You'd know him if you see him, if you don't remember the name. Also, a gentleman named Jeremy Strong is in it. He was also in Zero Dark 30 and Lincoln. He plays the Rules. He's also in Black Mass and The Big Short, as well as Molly's Game. Do you remember hearing about Molly's Game?
Wait, you said he played the Rules. His name is in the movie is actually Reed Miller.
But he says, "I'm the Rules."
Kind of. Yeah, at one point he does. I mean, the Reed Miller character is a euphemism for the Rules, but yeah.
But he was in Molly's Game, which I have not seen, which surprises me a little bit because this is the directorial debut of Aaron Sorkin.
Molly's
As
Game?
Jessica Chastain. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was one that was like I should see it, and I just haven't gotten around to it. But
Oh, you haven't seen that yet?
no, no, was it pretty good?
Um, I'd have to rewatch it before I want to answer that question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember. I saw it. I didn't see it in one sitting. I saw it in parts. So.
Okay.
Anyways, as the film opens, the opening sequence, I was watching it and I was kind of trying to figure out where they were going with
Well,
it.
they kind of hint at it from the very first shot. The very first shot is the boy, is Patrick, and his eyes looking at something on a computer screen, and then it cuts to the Serenity right at sea, and then the Serenity has
He's
that
got
little
the two paying
prologue thing with the
customers
paying
and- yeah.
customers.
Well, that prologue is what I wrote down a question about. I said, okay, is this going to be some sort of Moby Dick, Captain Ahab parallel?
Kind of is.
That prologue is. I don't know that I would say,
It is about obsession,
yeah.
the one that got away,
I mean, but did it?
in a couple ways.
But did it?
Kind of.
Then the next thought I had and jotted down was the definition of the word serenity. This film seems to entirely lack serenity.
It does. It's ironic.
Also, was it just me, or did Anne Hathaway's accent change during the film?
That didn't register. It may have.
It seemed like she had a really weird accent at the very beginning, and then later on it kind of seemed to go away.
Are these actors playing it straight, or are they intentionally playing it in a stilted manner?
I don't know.
Matthew
think that they're
McConaughey
mostly playing
seems
it
to be
straight.
playing it pretty straight.
I don't think
you
Matthew
can debate
McConaughey's
Anne
in-
Hathaway.
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure Matthew McConaughey is capable of playing a film anything but straight. I don't know that he can play a stilted role. Anne Hathaway, maybe she's playing a stilted role.
She's certainly putting on airs particularly late in the film when he's trying to talk her husband into going out on
I mean,
a boat.
this is kind of a weird performance from Anne Hathaway. Anne Hathaway can be a very solid actress. This one just kind of seemed a little odd for her.
Yeah.
Jason Clarke, he seemed to be playing a role that he always plays. I mean, you watch Jason Clarke in Zero Dark 30. He's demonstrating a very similar personality.
It's funny because when I think of Jason Clarke, I think of him as a little bit more staid. But I totally blanked that he was in Zero Dark 30.
Yeah, he's the CIA guy that's training Jessica Chastain.
I principally knew him from a show that was on Showtime called Brotherhood that was based loosely on Whitey Bulger and his brother. Whitey Bulger's brother was a prominent politician in Massachusetts. The show was set in Rhode Island, and Jason Clarke plays an important member of the state legislature. And his brother, Jason Isaacs, was exiled for some crime he had committed and comes back to Rhode Island, has the crime boss that took over from him killed, and starts to reassert his control over organized crime. It's a good show.
Yeah. Well, my next two notes I wrote down was Who's the Suit, which is Jeremy Strong playing the character Reed Miller. And then, fairly early in the film, when in kind of his early appearances, Reed Miller makes a reference to his allotted schedule.
Yeah, saying that Matthew McConaughey is.
I seem to have missed
off
my
of
allotted
schedule.
schedule by like 20
Yeah,
seconds.
yeah.
He says that at one point. And
And then he later says that he's missing McConaughey by more and more
yeah.
periods of time.
So but I wrote down what is his allotted schedule. And we've already said he's the rules. So I don't understand. That comment is even more perplexing now that I know that. So
Well, maybe
if he's the rules, what is his allotted schedule?
Yeah. Well, maybe at this point we need to explain what the twist is to really make sense is not the right word, but to help in the understanding of the rest
Or
of the
we could
film.
let them be just as confused as I was.
Yeah.
No, go ahead with the
Go
twist.
ahead. So one of the great things about this movie is the twist because it is so insane. It is an absolutely crazy twist. So I mentioned before that I have a movie blog, and I wrote a review of this movie shortly after seeing it theatrically back in February 29th of 2019. The film came out in January. It was in the Dollar Theater by late February. So this film did not do very well. It cost about $25 million to make, which is pretty affordable for a major motion picture, especially with the caliber of stars it has. Only made about $14.4 million in the box office, so it was a failure. I suspect this film will eventually re-earn its expenses, but I'm just going to briefly read my review of the film, and then we'll talk about the twist.
Okay.
The trailer for Serenity presents itself as a kind of low-rent neo-noir. Down on his luck fisherman Matthew McConaughey increasingly unravels after his ex-wife, Anne Hathaway, approaches him for help in killing her abusive current husband, Jason Clarke. That, in a sense, is what Serenity is about, along with the search for the perfect tuna. However, about halfway through this film, the audience is presented with a twist so disjointed, staggering, and bizarre that you can hardly believe this movie was ever actually made, especially with stars of this caliber. Said twist elevates Serenity from the unremarkable and forgettable into the top flight of so bad it's good movies. I simultaneously cannot possibly recommend Serenity, but I absolutely recommend Serenity. This is a 4-star, 1.5-star movie. It's very difficult to rate this because it is so poorly conceived, but just so wonderful to watch. And I enjoyed it even more watching it now the second time. So the twist is
Baker Dill or
Baker Dill.
yeah.
So Baker Dill is dead and a computer character. So Patrick is a boy whose father was killed in fighting in Iraq in 2006. His mother remarried. They live in South Florida. Married a man who was very abusive to her. Patrick was gifted with computers. He spends most of his time in his room. He has designed, apparently from scratch, a computer program called Plymouth Island, named for his high school. Even though they say he's 13, they also say he's in high school.
I didn't catch that.
Anyway, it's one of those games that has multiple games within it. So there's a game called Find the Cat.
Mm-hmm.
There's some kind of counting game. You earn money and you earn bottles of rum. And the principal game is to go out and catch this fish. And so he has programmed the
big fish.
Fisherman, big fish, to be his father. And over the course of he's using this as a distraction, as like an escape from the abusive situation at home. But at a certain point, he decides that he's going to reprogram the game, which he apparently created, to allow the avatar based on his father to kill an avatar based on his stepfather, because he feels that if he does this, it will give him the courage to actually kill his stepfather, which he does at the end of the film. That's a freaking crazy premise.
Yeah.
Why is this movie a movie?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, you could read a little bit more into this. I mean, you could try to, like, if you were trying to take this film really seriously and try and consider this a good film, you could read way beyond this, in that you could develop the Matthew McConaughey character into a little bit of a god construct, who is, It's not that the kid is changing the rules; it's that Matthew McConaughey's changing the rules, or the rules are changed. In some sort of context like that. Because they talk about in the movie that Matthew McConaughey's talking to the kid through the computer screen.
Yeah.
So Matthew McConaughey's talking to the kid, and then the kid eventually,
And he's talking to the kid from the very beginning of the film, but it appears at first to be metaphorical, like if you're talking to a dead relative or somebody far away as a way to kind of focus your thoughts. But he's also really talking to his son, and this kind of vague...
he seems to... There's an implication that he has a connection to his son that is...
psychic in some way, or appears to be early in the film.
It's beyond psychic, because you remember there's the part where Matthew McConaughey wakes up and there's water on the table, and the kid has knocked over his water on the table, and his hand's in the water, and so they're both playing with the water. It implies that the connection is beyond that, because Matthew McConaughey doesn't have any liquid on his table, yet his table has water on it. So it implies that the connection is broader than that. So, I mean, you could look at it from that perspective, which gets interesting with some of the notes I wrote down later on.
Okay.
It was interesting, though, that within the construct of this game or this world, that... Because to the kid, this game is not a game. It's his world.
Yeah.
He's created this as a world. And I'll illustrate that later on, because later in the movie, when he changes the game, the world... changes of the game, and you actively see the world change. But it's interesting, regardless, that within the construct of this, that everyone knows everyone's business.
Yeah, that's one of the things that it's designed that you pick up on it, and it gets more and more blatant as it goes on. And I think I recall you letting out some kind of expression at a certain point where somebody said something they couldn't possibly know, and you're like, what?
Well, and there's also the part where Anne Hathaway has been on the island, and then...
everybody's talking to Baker Dill with extremely detailed information about what's going on with Anne Hathaway.
I can't remember if it was Diane Lane's character that says this, or whether it's...
the lady at the bait shop?
Yeah, or whether it's the lady at the bait shop, but somebody says she needs to be saved. How can everyone know this, and how can people be... I guess, trying to plant this idea in his head.
So they have this saying in the film that on Plymouth, everybody knows everybody's business. And so at first, the implication seems to be small towns.
Yeah.
Everybody knows everybody's business.
Well,
but everybody literally knows everybody's business because they're part of a computer program.
Well, and I think that they're trying to build the suspense of how will he get away with it if everyone knows. Which he works out later in the film.
Yeah, but even though they know, they all... well, to one degree or another, seem to be collectively nudging him in that direction until later they turn around and they start to nudge him in the other direction.
Very heavily. Yeah, the roles try to take over. I noted that the acting is over the top. And you can't tell whether that was by design.
I think it was by design.
I mean, even at this point, as we're talking about it, I still am not 100% positive whether the acting was intentionally over the top.
I feel like the only one that was playing it truly straight the entire way through was Matthew McConaughey, and everybody else was kind of in on it.
Yeah. It all depends on... I think it kind of depends on what view you're looking at it from. If you look at it through the God construct view, I don't think that it is over the top.
One other interesting thought that occurred to me, there's a scene where Baker Dill is talking to the rules on the beach, and the rules is like, you know who the creator is, basically. You know who God is. And God is his son.
See, I'm going to get to that later. I actually have some specific thoughts on that, but you're jumping a little too far ahead. I have a question for you.
Okay.
If this is some modern adaptation of a Moby Dick or Captain Ahab scenario, within that context, who is the Reed Miller character supposed to represent?
I've never actually read Moby Dick. I just made a Zelig reference. Which I'll appreciate, but nobody else will appreciate.
Yeah.
So I've never read it. I don't know. Did you have thoughts on who?
No.
No? Because...
I mean, maybe...
maybe isn't Ishmael the narrator of Moby Dick? And he's kind of observing Captain Ahab's obsession.
I have to look at some notes and refresh myself. I wanted to say Quig is the narrator, but...
No, because I know the first line of Moby Dick, which is Call Me Ishmael.
Oh,
so
yeah,
Ishmael is
right.
the narrator.
Yeah. 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 I'm not
So
sure.
maybe they and there's multiple.
But Reed
There's
Miller
multiple.
can't be the narrator.
But there's multiple Abraham or Ahab's and Moby Dick's in this, because Matthew McConaughey's an Ahab, and the Justice, which is the name he gives the giant tuna he's pursuing obsessively, is an obvious choice to be Moby Dick, but so is Jason Clarke, and so is his son and his daughter.
Well, if this is an adaptation of Moby Dick, they're changing the end of Moby Dick.
Yeah, I mean, it's a loose, it's rumin,
Yeah.
you know, they're spitballing.
So here's another question for you, though. Within that context, if that's the case, well, regardless of what context you look at this from, who is Fontaine?
Fontaine is the program. Fontaine's like the software that the boy created the program off of, because the rules says that he is a representative of the program, and the Fontaine is the tackle company that he supposedly works for, but is a pseudonym for the program.
Okay, I'll buy that. Yeah, I wrote down a question of why the creator has changed the rules. We kind of know that now. The empty map visualization was kind of interesting.
Because eventually the rules basically tells Dylan Baker, this is a game, and he struggles with that, and he realizes there's big gaps in my memory. So I don't know how long I've been here. Maybe I am a game.
Yeah. So then I go back to the beach scene. There's some specific, what I think is specific imagery used there, and it's interesting imagery.
All right.
So they're sitting on the log on the beach, and Reed Miller, or the rules, offers to help. Okay, there's a very brief shot, and I'm kind of curious if you notice this. There's kind of a shot between shots. Baker Dill stands up, and they're talking face to face, right? And then you get a shot of Baker Dill's face. Do you recall what the next shot is?
Is this the shot where you see a shoe
Yes.
washing to shore?
It's not washing to shore, it's washing away.
Washing away. Okay.
It's and it's Reed Miller's shoe.
Because the angle there, like he's there and then he's not there, and it's kind of like inconsistent, and then you kind of hear him, and it's implied he's still there, but now you're not seeing him, and you're seeing his shoe. They do a number of interesting...
It means that the rules don't exist.
The rules don't exist. That's existential.
At least that's the way I interpreted it in that moment. Because at that point, he's already told Baker Dill, I am the rules.
Yeah.
No, he's told him, I am the rules. And now, because Baker Dill is still standing there.
Yeah.
So we've just seen a shot of Baker Dill, and then he's looking, and now Reed Miller's gone. The rules don't exist.
I like how... So at first, Reed Miller's trying to keep Baker Dill from killing, because for whatever reason, the program doesn't want to be reprogrammed. It actually has a line that says, we're not that kind of game. Nobody dies on Plymouth Island. And then when Baker Dill has seized his fate and decided, I'm going to do what my boy wants me to do, I'm going to kill this guy, the rules turns to him and says, well, if the rules have changed, then I should help you then. They never really pay that off, but it's an interesting line.
They kind of do with the log floating in the water later, but not really. And
what do you suppose that means?
I'm not positive.
Because there's a log that Matthew McConaughey is sitting on when they have their conversation. Yeah. And then later, it's way out to sea for no apparent reason at about the period of time where they're killing Jason Clarke.
Well, and it might be a throwback to this. I kind of, in real time, my thought process was it was a reminder of the conversation, and then Reed Miller was gone. So
it's like it's showing his presence there.
To me, it's
metaphorical.
In real time, and then I dismissed it. I'm re-entertaining it. In real time, the thought process I had was it was a reminder to Baker Dill that the rules don't exist. And then simultaneously a reminder to him that he has to do it within the rules. The rules don't exist, but you have to kill him within the rules. Which then ultimately, I think, plays into how he kills him.
So we should probably talk about that. So Anne Hathaway comes to the island. and offers her ex-husband, "I'll give you $10 million if you kill this guy." And the pretext that she set up is she had been, I guess, her new husband, like her first husband, enjoys fishing. And so she had set up this fishing vacation, chosen the island, had chosen Baker Dill to take them out on the boat. Dill has an occasional first mate played by
his character's name is
Duke, played by Mr. Hunsu.
Yeah.
And he's kind of an interesting character. He lives in a church, so he's also a pastor of some sort.
Yeah.
And his wife recently passed away, and they have some comments about that, including a very rude comment that I remember you reacting to.
Well, Duke is intended. This was very clear to me. Duke is intended to be the conscience.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so that's the rude comment to dismiss Duke is Baker Dill dismissing his conscience.
Mm-hmm. So he again he lives at the church. Presumably, is the pastor there. He occasionally is the first mate for Baker Dill.
So Duke is supposed to be the conscience, right?
Mm-hmm.
So at the beginning of the film, how does he pay Duke?
I forget.
He engages in prostitution.
Oh yeah, that we have to circle back to that, but I think I'm remembering where it was going. So early in the film, or midway through the film, when Baker Dill is kind of going back and forth about, am I going to kill this guy or not? Eventually, he's persuaded to take him out onto the boat because he's being offered $10,000 to do it, and Baker Dill needs the money. As does Duke. So they agree to a 20-80 split on the money, and he tells Duke, I need you there to keep me from giving in to my passions, my temptations. And so Duke's kind of like, I wonder what that means. And because he's there, at least in part, Baker Dill does not kill Jason Clarke on their first voyage. But eventually, a number of things happen, and he does agree, I'm going to do it the next day when we go out again. Baker is. But Duke, not wanting his friend to commit murder, hires some Argentine boys.
Some Argentinians.
To beat the crap out of Jason Clarke and break his hand so that he won't be able to go fishing. But Anna Hathaway manages to convince him to go with this. Oh, I wanted
She's
my
so
daddy.
committed to this plot.
Daddy's going to get me some fish, and I was so hoping that you'd get me a big, strong.
Well, and Baker has promised her that he's going to do it the next day, and so she's got to find a way to get him to the boat.
He is in no condition to be going out and doing this, but they get him loaded with rum. They talk him up so that he goes out onto the boat, and there's a complication, which goes back to.
I have a question before we get there. So, as they're getting ready to leave, Diane Lane's character is watching from the window, which she has been doing throughout the film. But the cat comes walking down the dock. What is the significance of the cat?
That's a good question.
Because that cat makes an appearance several times throughout the film.
Because that is one of the games on Plymouth Island, which is the catch the cat, to find the cat. But yeah, they make a point of showing the cat on the dock just before. Yeah. Maybe because that game is about finding the cat. Maybe it's a message about find yourself. But it definitely was a deliberate choice to put that cat there. So Diane Lane is a lady. I have no idea how she makes her money. Is she retired?
That's
living off of. So she lives on the island. She's got a son who has at times been on the island, but at the beginning of the film is pumping gas in Miami, and he eventually shows up because Diane Lane says, "Well, you always said he was lucky, and maybe he can come down here and work for you."
Well, Baker Dill suggests that he could come down and work for him when he fires Duke.
Yeah, and he ends up coming down really for purposes of putting a further obstacle towards Baker killing Jason Clarke. So he just shows up uninvited on the boat when Anne Hathaway and him go out with the intention of killing Jason Clarke. And so they have to kind of distract him and create a plausible deniability scenario in which Clarke insists, because he's been egged into doing it.
Well, and as this is happening, you're seeing reflections of the son's face in a computer screen with lines of code running.
Yeah.
And that happens kind of periodically throughout this ending. It happens more and more frequently as the film goes.
So basically, they get Jason Clarke to hold the rod when he's not ready to take the full weight of the shark.
Well, he's so drunk and intoxicated, there's no
Yeah.
possible way he could do it. But there's a moment leading up to this that after he's there, Matthew McConaughey is kind of trying to figure out what to do. And he's standing on the boat and he says, change the game, you know. So then he starts chumming the water and he tells Anne Hathaway's character to get the harness, the rig on him for holding the rod. So he chums the water and pretty soon, you know, something hits the line. It's pulling the line out. Matthew McConaughey picks up and sets the hook. And that's when, you know, they're trying to wake Jason Clarke, whose character's name is Frank, up and get Frank set up. They get him standing up. And Anne Hathaway, you know, is calling him daddy, trying to get him to come to life, show some interest and spunk. He says, you know, give me the line, let's go. So Matthew McConaughey calls up to the kid who's on the upper deck of the boat.
The paying customer has insisted on taking the line.
Yeah. And so they hook him in before Matthew McConaughey lets go of the rod. It pulls him overboard. Matthew McConaughey promptly yells, man overboard. And the fish or the shark or whatever pulls him under the water. And
He's a goner.
that's it.
And then in juxtaposition, the boy goes out of his room, takes a knife which he has been hiding in a tackle box.
No, it's Matthew McConaughey's knife. It's the
Knife
same
from
knife.
service.
It's Matthew McConaughey's service knife, his K-bar knife from his military service.
Goes in the other room, kills the real Jason Clarke who's been abusing his mother.
Kills Frank with a single stab to the chest.
We get clips, audio clips from local news broadcasts going over what's happened, that this 13-year-old boy killed his abusive stepfather. And then there's this weird kind of, the ending.
Well, so in that news coverage, they say that he's been released
In the care of his mother,
into his mother's care.
pending some evaluation.
Yeah, and so he goes home, and as soon as he's at home, we get a picture of him at home, and he sits down at the computer and starts typing. And then that's when the phone rings in Matthew McConaughey's world. He answers the phone. They have kind of a conversation with the son, and he says, I want to come be in your world. I'll meet you at Serenity. And that's when the world construct starts to change directly around Matthew McConaughey.
And they do make a comment, one of the news broadcasters, that after committing the murder, he hasn't spoken to anybody. So when he comes back after getting out of jail, he is very literally escaping into another world.
But I have a specific question about that.
Okay, yeah.
So you've heard his voice earlier in the movie only when he's talking to Matthew McConaughey. It's alluded that he said one thing to his stepfather, Frank. He's told Frank, the only reason I play this game is to keep me from killing you.
If I wasn't catching fish all day, I'd be coming up with a way to kill you.
Yeah. But you don't ever actually hear him say that. You don't hear him talk to anyone in the quote-unquote real world.
This is the abusive stepfather's avatar, the version of him in the Plymouth Island world, relays this story to Matthew McConaughey, not realizing that Matthew McConaughey is the actual father, or a representation of the actual father.
Yeah. So now this is where we kind of come back to the God complex version of this, is what I'll refer to it as, where either one or the other of them is God, and I would say that would have to be the Matthew McConaughey character. Patrick ends up joining the game. Matthew McConaughey is supposed to be dead, right? So how can Patrick join the game if he's still alive?
So are you saying that indicates he may have committed suicide?
Yes.
I hadn't thought of it, but it makes sense. Because it makes a lot more sense than that not happening.
Yeah. How else does he join the game?
Yeah. Exactly. Well, good point.
And the world is changing around Matthew McConaughey. What else could be the catalyst to change the world around him?
And in a way, they're both God. They're the Father and the Son.
Yes.
This movie is really strange.
And I don't know whether to actually give credit to that being an intentional choice, and that's what this film is trying to do, or we're reaching to explain this film.
Maybe.
And I honestly don't know which it is.
I know.
We might be reaching to explain this film, or we might be spot on. I honestly have no
I mean,
clue.
this guy is a talented screenwriter. He knows what he's doing, so maybe it's best to not underestimate him. I mean, maybe he was reaching for something. It's such a bizarre choice. I mean, I definitely credit him for doing something different. This is a twist I've not encountered before in anything.
Now, remind me, I know you like the Chicago Sun-Times. Do you like Robert?
Ebert and Roper, yeah. Are you? I was looking at this too. So Roger Ebert, of course, passed away a few years ago, but he's got a website with reviewers that continue.
Richard Roper.
It was okay. This is Richard Roper.
Yeah, from the Chicago Sun-Times.
All right, go ahead. What does he say?
He gave it a great review, 3.5 stars.
Really? Because RogerEbert.com, there's a lady who writes there named Christy Lemire, and this is quoted on the Wikipedia page for this movie. It says, Christy Lemire of RogerEbert.com gave the film 1 star, calling it terrible and insane. Which is funny and accurate and not accurate at the same time.
Richard Roper, his review starts off, he says, my first thought after seeing Serenity was, I can't wait to see it again.
Indeed. He would, I think, be in the minority of critics.
So, where I'm looking at this, there's 2 positive reviews, and the rest of them are kind of
yeah, it
not
says
so positive.
Rotten Tomatoes, it holds an approval rating of 20%.
So on IMDb, it averages 5.3 out of 10 stars, and says the Metascore, which is the critics' reviews, is 37 out of 100.
Wow.
So either we figured this movie out, and there's layers here, and this is a good film, or we missed the bar, and this film kind of sucks.
Or it's a bizarre combination of the two things.
I suspect I'll end up watching this again at some point to see if I can figure this out any further.
I enjoyed watching this much more the second time than the first time. I have a feeling that this is going to be one of those films that is just going to be just really enjoyable to rewatch. It'll probably get more bonkers every time.
So let me ask you then, how would you rate it today?
Well, before we get to ratings and final thoughts, there are a couple
I
things.
didn't really want to get to final thoughts.
Okay.
I just wanted to.
Just how would I rate it today? Okay, so my initial rating was I called it a 4-star, 1.5-star movie. Because it's this combination of just bad and cliche and what the crap were they thinking with. It's just so fun to watch. Very difficult to score. I would probably keep that rating of a 4-star, 1.5-star movie.
I'm trying to decide how I would rate it. Part of me wants to avoid calling it a 1.5-star movie just because you did, but I think it's a 1.5-star movie. On the 10-star scale, I'd probably give it 4 stars.
Yeah, I'd probably give it 4 or 5 stars. It's a guilty pleasure movie. It ain't good, but it's good.
So even though we're giving this bad ratings, I'd say watch it.
Yeah, I know it's funny. It's like most of what I have to say. It's just bonkers. I mean, there's 2 other things I wanted to at least touch on briefly. So he's made the conscious choice to take his dead father and make him the principal avatar for this game. Some of the things he has his father do are odd, particularly odd choices. For example, he pimps his father out to Diane Lane on a regular basis. There is a male prostitute
Whenever he needs
game
to pay the bills.
that he can go play this Diane Lane game whenever he needs to get some extra money to pay the bills, which is bizarre. And then they have that weird kind of dream sequence where they are swimming naked together, father and son. That is also weird.
That one seemed a little bit less weird in real time. It seemed as though there was some element of Matthew McConaughey could communicate with him if he gets deep enough in the water.
And you have
But only at
imagery.
certain times, because he jumps in the water and then seems surprised to be hearing Patrick's voice. And that's when he surfaces, takes a breath, and dives deep.
Oh, and then you have imagery. So Baker Dill is swimming down. Patrick is swimming up. They are reaching their hands out together. It's like God and Adam on the Sistine Chapel. Man, there's a lot of obvious God imagery in this movie. I don't think we're making it up. I think it's there.
I'm kind of afraid of that.
And then one other thing, just casting choices. So they mention in a conversation or two between Anne Hathaway and Matthew McConaughey, between Baker Dill and Karen Zarakis. She says, it took me a while to track you down. We had the high school reunion. Only two didn't come, me and you. And one of our schoolmates was down on a fishing vacation on Plymouth Island, took a photo. Could have swear that was you in the background. I got a copy of the photo and then kind of tracked you down from that. And then they talk about how they met in high school, and he was her first, and when he gave her this ring on this bridge when they were in high school, and so they were high school sweethearts. Issue. Matthew McConaughey was born in 1969. Anne Hathaway was born in 1982. There is a 13-year age difference between these two. If they were in high school together, he was her teacher. This is one of the most glaring...
See, but Matthew McConaughey doesn't age.
That's true. I mean, you're looking at him in this film. This filmed in 2017, so it would have been like 48. Doesn't look 48.
Yeah.
It was a good-looking 48.
Plus, it's movie time, so the actual real-world age difference between the two of them doesn't matter.
That's a ridiculous age difference, and to pass them off as high school sweethearts.
Yes, but we also know that I know people with greater age differences.
No, that's true.
Yeah. So, again, I want to come back to that question of, at the beginning of the film, so Duke is supposed to be his conscience, right? Mm-hmm. So at the beginning of the film, he makes the choice to take a fish on himself, and he doesn't get paid from their clients. Mm-hmm. So Duke needs to be paid. Baker Dill goes to Constance, which is Diane Lane's character's name, and pimps himself out to Diane Lane to get money to pay his conscience.
Indeed.
That still strikes me as just odd. I don't know how to explain that.
Some of this is just so heavy-handed that it's like, creative writing class, and it's a sophomore in high school who's coming up with this. But it's also being come up with by a 13-year-old boy. I mean, so there's like levels, layers on top of layers.
Yeah.
So where it's cliched, it doesn't make sense. It's supposed to be cliched and not make sense because of who's supposedly creating it.
Yeah. Any other thoughts on this film?
It's a bizarre film, but I will definitely have to watch this one again. It's just, why does this exist? There's a podcast called How Does This Get Made? There's 3 hosts, and they occasionally have guest hosts. They're all actors. Interestingly, all 3 of those actors are in The Disaster Artist, which is the film about the making of the film The Room, which was kind of like an in-joke that they would all be in this film. June Diane Raphael, Jason Mantzoukas, and I'm forgetting the name of the other guy. There's a line in the theme song for How Did This Get Made? We'll plumb the mediocrities of subpar art. Perhaps we'll find the answer to the question, how did this get made? And that is a question I have about this film. Somebody approved this film. These stars signed up to this film.
It's got an incredible cast.
But they've read the script.
Or their agents have read the script. Yeah.
So it's a puzzler. It's a real puzzling movie. Not good, but extremely entertaining.
Yep.
So again, I 4-star, 1.5-star movie. 4 or 5 stars on the 10-star scale.
Yep. 1.5 star for me, and I'd give it 4 stars on the 10-star scale. So this will conclude this episode. I'm Rob.
And I'm Nate.
And this is Rob and Nate Record a Podcast. Thanks for joining us.
So would you have your wife watch this movie? Is this one you'd recommend to her?
Yeah, I'd watch it at home.
What do you think she'd make of it?
I think she'd be confused.
Uh,
She doesn't generally go straight to that God construct thing like I did.
Yeah.
So I think she would. I think she'd be entertained, but I don't think she'd like it.
Yeah.
But I'd show it to her anyway.
Mm.
Yeah.
So I was one thing that I forgot to mention earlier. So I went and saw this at the Dollar Theater, and the thing with the Dollar Theater is, you never know how long a movie's going to be there. Like it could be there for a week, or it could be there for months.
Yeah.
And
So with you kind of once
certain
you see it
things,
there, you go.
Yeah, once I see it, especially if it's like this is a weird, this movie didn't do particularly good. I think I've got kind of a sense of a film if I think that it's going to be there for a long time or not. And I figure this film's going to be there for a week, and I think it was only there for a week. And I want to say I saw it on like a Thursday, which is when, because it switches out on Friday.
Oh yeah.
So it's usually like I've been thinking about seeing this all week. I'm going to go and see this after work. So I don't know, maybe 10 people or so in the audience, maybe close to 15 actually. And usually there's big gaps between where people are sitting, but there was people behind me, like 1 or 2 rows behind me. And there was a lady, probably a middle-aged lady, and I think one other person, and like a 10-year-old boy. This is not a movie that you bring a 10-year-old. Like, why would you bring... I mean...
This movie's rated R. Why would
this
you
movie
bring a
is
10-year-old
rated
boy?
R, I know. And there's some of those scenes... It's more implied than anything about the abuse that Jason Clarke and Hathaway, and the scene in the hotel room where has her... They don't show anything full frontal, but has her take her clothes off so that he can look at her scars because he wants to admire his handiwork, apparently.
Yeah.
There's also a bizarre fixation on coming from behind.
Yeah.
By multiple characters, which I think maybe feeds in the fact that a 13-year-old boy is coming up with this.
Only when it involves Anne Hathaway.
Which is his mom, which is really weird.
I hadn't thought of that.
See, there's a lot of... It's like, yeah, just these really weird choices. This kid's pretty screwed up.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.